One of the more important aspects over the course of 2019 is a square between Jupiter and Neptune. What's specifically interesting about this aspect is that Jupiter is in its own sign of Sagittarius and Neptune is in its own sign of Pisces. Whenever a planet's in its own sign, it's regarded as in honor and it gives it added strength. So the square, being something of an edgy, combative aspect, can be described as two great kings squaring off and, really having to battle it out to see, what will come about. And as is often true in a battle, it's neither entirely a victory either side, but something new emerges out of it, positively speaking, something progressive. This is not always true. Things could go either way, but the square is an aspect in astrology which is indicative of the fact that conflict appears to be a part of the game plan on our planet. And in any case, in this presentation, I'll provide you some insights about this very, very important aspect for our times and see if we can get some clear insights about what it really means. Now, we are referring to, of course, cycles. Whenever two planets are in relationship to one another, they can be understood to be at a stage or a phase of their overall cycle of relationship. Cycles are always based on relationships between any two planets or three, but generally we refer to it as a duality, any two planets. But you'll see in the course of this little chat that there is a triple factor at play here. Basically speaking, a cycle, which is symbolically related to a circle and a sphere, is just quickly that it represents a 360-degree process, completing its circle. And as is the case in astrology, the zodiac divides that circle by 12, so you get 12 segments of 30 degrees, so you'll never see any planet or angle higher than 30 degrees. Just keep that in mind, basically. There is another video on cycles here in the archive that you can look at more closely. An event of a cycle has three start points, basically. One is when there is a conjunction, which is the most powerful of the three. See, in astrology, it's all about the planets mostly. The zodiac signs are important, but they actually are secondary to the actual relationship between the planets. So whenever two planets are conjunct, it begins a new cycle. Whenever a planet enters a new sign, it begins a new cycle. But whenever a planet enters Aries, it begins a major new cycle. Aries, being the first sign of the zodiac, indicates that it begins an entirely new round. Whereas when it enters the new sign, it's sort of entering a sub-cycle within that larger cycle. It's important all on its own, and it can, be a long period of time while a planet goes through one sign. But it ultimately is a sub-cycle within the larger entire zodiacal round. Okay, so conjunctions and entry into signs are the beginning of new cycles. But the conjunction is the most powerful, and that's the key thing to remember here. And so we're going to look at the Jupiter-Neptune square, but initially from the standpoint of its birth or the beginning of the cycle. So back in 2009 is when Jupiter conjunct Neptune in Aquarius, by the way. I didn't mark it that it's 2009, but I'll show you in a moment more clearly the dates. May 29th, July 10th, and December 21st, winter solstice of 2009, specifically were the three dates when it began. You see, due to retrograding of the far planets, which is very common, we often get triple conjunction. So it can be described in a variety of ways, and I'm not going to do the full justice of what that would mean, but just that the emphasis of the conjunction occurred three times, and it activated the themes of Aquarius in three slightly different ways. In fact, in this case, more so, which again I'll explain momentarily. You see what happened there. You see May 23rd, 2009, it was actually a triple conjunction. that occurred between not only Jupiter and Neptune, but Chiron was in there as well. And so what we see here specifically is a triple conjunction, all three of these planets at 26 degrees, but technically they're not at the same minute. So technically they're not specifically all three conjunct, but it's one of those points of, in astrology where it gets a little fuzzy because the exact degree itself is very powerful and rare for there to be a triple, especially of the far planets, by the way. So that's very interesting all on its own. Now, the second of the conjunctions did occur on May 27th, so that was shortly thereafter. First one was Jupiter Chiron, the second was Jupiter Neptune, and then it was all the way at the December 21st winter solstice of that year where we had the final conjunction between Jupiter and Neptune. But what I want to do here quickly is illustrate how this looks in a more animated sense, and I'm going to emphasize the theme of the triple conjunction over the course of the year back in 2009. And I'm referring to it once again because that was the anchoring point or time of the current square we're experiencing. And in order to understand the square well, you have to, which is well, in this case, it's called the upper square, the final phase of 90 degrees of the cycle. But you have to really, to understand it well, you have to understand the root and what was going on then. So we're going to have a little closer look here. Okay, this chart will animate each pulse, is every time you see the moon moving there, it's one day. So we're already at May 29th, already the conjunction occurred. But what I want you to see specifically is over the course of the year, just how tightly woven these three planets, Jupiter, Neptune, and Chiron, were, in fact. You'll recall that was when Obama took office. By the way, technically he was elected in 2008, but he got into office in 2009. So it was very much at the time the hope of the new time with this new president, etc., where a great healing of the nation was to occur. Now, maybe good things did occur, and not only strictly specifically in the United States, because the aspects of the planets cover the entire planet. So it always depends on how specifically these planets are aspecting key points or placements in the natal chart, the birth chart of the person in question. And a person can apply to a nation, a province, a state, a company, an institution, an individual. So by this time we're at September 24th, you'll notice, although that the moon's moving quickly, of course, and the sun's slugging along, plodding along 1 degree per day, just like that, and you'll see the other Mercury and Venus moving fairly quickly. Pluto moves very, very slowly, so you don't see it moving, and Saturn too over the course of the year. Mars should move a bit faster, but it was probably retrograde. But most importantly, look how how locked in the Jupiter, Chiron, and Neptune appeared to be. It's holding the degree here is holding the degree position of Neptune. So by now we're at December 11th, 12th, 13th. See, I'm about to stop it right on winter solstice. There we go. Okay, well, that was a day after. But I brought it to the end of the year. So you just quickly saw an example of over the course of the year that Chiron, Neptune, and Jupiter remain very, very tight. The reason we stop it here, I did at this point, is because that was the last official conjunction that Jupiter was going to make to both Chiron and Neptune in that tight trio before moving on from there. So technically it was completed then at that, winter solstice 2009, but they still remained, as I'll show you, as I just will advance it for a bit longer. Just keep watching Neptune. It's moving slowly. It's at 25 now, 26. It's pulling away now from that tight conjunction. Now we're in 2010. Jupiter's progressing. It's about to enter Pisces momentarily. It just did. So that will be enough for now. I'll just leave it there, but you can see how even Neptune and Chiron remained in close embrace by their own conjunction, but that's not the focus of this particular talk, so I'll leave that one alone for now. We just gave you an illustrated example of how strongly anchored was the theme of not only Jupiter and Neptune, but Chiron as well in Aquarius. So the main thing here, we're looking at a static chart of Jupiter conjunct Neptune on December 21st, 2009. And there they are at 24:17 exactly. The main thing here is there's a very, very strong Aquarian theme. And it is also very worth noting here that not only was Jupiter and Chiron and Neptune at 24:17, but the Moon and Chiron were also conjunct just a little bit earlier, exactly conjunct at 22 degrees. So these are all, it's not just what does it mean in a flat way, that's what it means, but it does show a significance that there's a destiny theme at play. And it's really through the cycle of Jupiter in aspect to Neptune throughout its cycle, it has key points. And the last one that we're at the final square is sort of the culmination. It's where the real goods come forward. So it's interesting to imagine that, and we kind of look at what are the synchronicities in the world, and I'll show you a few in a couple of minutes about what can be understood to be going on. One of the key things that is worth noting is on that day of winter solstice 2009, the sun hadn't quite entered Capricorn yet, so it was at the critical degree of 29 degrees. What it's basically saying is humanity, we're at a critical point of, as this global village that's emerging, establishes itself, we have to really set aside our beliefs, prejudices and biases, at least be more tolerant than we have been historically. And we do see that happening. Fortunately, this is not a new story. It's been happening over the, decades, in fact, at this point. But, circumstances in the world are pushing us even harder to go to the next level of that process. That's one way of looking at it. This briefly just wanted to show you that, every planetary pair forming conjunctions begin new cycle, and it's just interesting that a Neptune cycle is about 165 years, and Jupiter and Neptune form a conjunction every one here over the course of that 165-year period. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Yeah, 13 complete cycles before it begins a new round with Aries there. And so that's the main point I want to show them. But this is the one we're looking at. Now, the key thing is, and this is just an example, just a metaphor, that each cycle between any two planets has its own flavor. So even though we're talking about a Jupiter-Neptune cycle, that each time it occurs, as we saw, there's many over the years, right? And that's all encompassed by one Neptune cycle. That's how cycles work. Far planets take a long time, but when you put two others together, they can be many that occur between those because of the faster moving planet, of course. Now, the main thing is that each one has its own quality, its own stamp. Even though they're the same two planets, every time they do form a conjunction, it has a different rhythm, a different meaning, a different theme of destiny. Okay, so that's basically the understanding of that. Now, it so happens that when it formed a conjunction on the last day there, and the last one in a way is the takeaway, the one that occurred on the 21st of December that year. It's interesting to note that according to the dream spell, which is very closely aligned with the Gregorian calendar, which astrology in the West is very, very tied to, we see the theme of the yellow solar human, and it has this little poem that reads, but the key word is free will in there. I pulse in order to influence realizing wisdom. I seal the process of free will with the solar tone of intention. I'm guided by the power of elegance. Because we're talking about Jupiter and Neptune, which are the spiritual planets, by the way, whereas Jupiter is very philosophical and Neptune is very mystical. Jupiter's about ethics and Neptune's about communion, where Jupiter's about the moral, ethical value and principles behind unity. Neptune again seeps more into the deep sense that there's only oneness in the universe. There is no division and separation or relative illusion. So between the more principle-driven Jupiter in Sagittarius versus communion-based, mysticism-based Neptune in Pisces, you get this real interesting dynamic between these two rather strong spiritual themes. Now, the humanitarian, the number 9, by the way, it was solar. Solar in the mind is number 9, and it symbolized this here represents what 9 is about. The humanitarian, whose being unfolds the larger pattern of the new world, the number of completion and expansion. Very apropos for where we're at right now in history. There's many more pieces to the larger puzzle here, but 2019 can be understood to be setting the stage for some very major conjunctions set to occur in 2020, specifically that of Saturn and Pluto, and Jupiter and Saturn and Jupiter, excuse me. There's 2 with Saturn. It just so happens Saturn will first form a conjunction with Pluto, beginning a new cycle of over a period of years that will unfold after that. And then later in the year, it will form a conjunction with Jupiter. So Saturn will play a major role. But the main thing to understand is that currently we're dealing this year, 2019, with the preparing the ground. It serves its own end, but in the larger scheme of things, in the continuum, it is serving to make way for the new cycles of change that are coming in the third decade of this millennium. So number 9 is also, the whole theme here is also one of quickening, and adjustments are made, and circuits of consciousness are naturally transformed by the theme of the number 9, and it can be described as being under a process of being rewired. And another higher description linked directly to that number 9 is that higher centers of the brain and the light-sensitive pineal and pituitary glands are being activated. So that's a very wonderful consideration, that there is this, what can be described as an alchemical process always underway. You could say that the cycles of nature that are indicated by the planets in particular in their orbital, process, and the way they join together from the Earth's perspective. It's always important to note that from the Earth's perspective, because we are the players on the stage, and without us there'd be no reason for meaning, because it's about what does it mean to us. Anyway, the main point is that there's a deeper rhyme and reason always at work, and these are all evolutionary themes that are unfolding, and it just basically shows that this Jupiter-Neptune conjunction has been maybe at a variety of levels supporting a rewiring of our perceptions, our values, our attitudes, and these will unfold synchronistically in society as rather movements, sometimes as events, but often as movements, which I'm going to illustrate a bit better. Remember, we're talking about what began back in 2009 as the beginning of the cycle. So Jupiter squared Neptune over the course of 2019 now, this upper square, that means Jupiter is in its last phase, where it will be making a new aspect to Neptune in just over in 2022. So it's still a few years away before it makes its final, completes its cycle with the anchor being in Aquarius, and when it does, it will be in the sign of Pisces. It tends to do that, goes nice and rhythmically to the next sign, then the next sign after that. So there's a whole story behind that, which we're not going to go into, but that's why I showed you the slide of all the Jupiter conjunction of Neptune earlier. Okay, but anyway, as it is, the dates are January 13th, June 16th, and September 21st of this year are the key date points when the square will occur. So it's very much a process. It's like having to tap something 3 times before it's complete. So the first tap has occurred on the 13th at this stage, the next one all the way in June, and the final one in September. So by the time the 3 squares occur, the process that was intended by destiny will be activated. It can be described basically as a theme of spiritual awakening. Negatively, it can be referred to as religious fanaticism or mass deception and even mass denial. So, corruption is not a new story on the planet, and neither are, strong biases and opinions and, fundamentalist attitudes. So, as is the story, we have, even amidst the high point theme of spiritual awakening and activation of higher centers of consciousness, which I do believe are occurring for us all, we have to also contend with the very real possibilities of reaction and resistance to these evolutionary movements and changes. And that's where we get it. Resistance is one way of saying it, but also those who want to resist it for their own reasons, but also those who want to manipulate it for their own reasons. So between the resistance factors and the manipulation factors, this is where we get into the corruption and really the painful drama of life, negatively speaking. Now, the themes of religion are here, very Jupiter and Sagittarius. By the way, Jupiter and Sagittarius is very much about the conviction of one's beliefs. What this is basically illustrating is that clearly this is just a short list of that, there's various religions on the planet still that are going strong, and, the adherents to each of them aren't about to give up on their beliefs. These, although some are ebbing and some are rising and getting stronger, they all remain, present and active in the world. So we have all these different belief systems. People, of course, often will be critical of religion and feel that religion is the root of all evils. It's what separates people, and it is true. Religions do separate people, but, it's not just because we feel that they do that suddenly people are going to stop having their beliefs. That would be unrealistic. It'd be nice, perhaps. I'm not saying it's not maybe an ideal thing, but it's not a reality. Neither. People are just not going to stop believing what they believe in and having conviction in those beliefs. It just doesn't work that way. So we, what we're after, of course, what this square represents is a world where we become very, not just tolerant, but appreciative, respectful, embracing of other religious beliefs. And that's exactly the issue in the square. The Jupiterian conviction of religious belief versus the deeper sense of oneness and communion and so forth that Neptune and Pisces represents. And that's where it all comes down. So we're all hoping and wanting to, celebrate the many different religions on the planet and having the opportunity to explore each one as we might. And each one, of course, tends to have its very strong convictions, but only when the one assumes that it's the only one do we run into trouble. And that, if you'll see on this particular list, there's only 1 or 2 that really do that. And sadly, we're talking about Islam and Christianity. The others may be strong, but they're seldom determined in a fanatical way. Fundamentalism is really the issue here we're talking about. So a lot of people would, aspire to say they're more spiritual than religious, and that's fine too. Others will say none of that's true, and they're scientists, etc. But materialism and science actually can be understood as being its own religion. Scientists and materialists won't like that statement, but it's true. If closely analyzed, both science and atheism or materialism actually has a lot of dogma, a lot of conviction, a lot of belief. It's not all absolute proof and obvious and objective. They might think it's that, but it's not. It's subject to paradigms and so forth. So beliefs, convictions, philosophies, paradigms, and so forth are always at play within all of us. Only when we realize that we are strongly biased, then we become a little bit more objective. But if we don't think we're biased, we think we're already objective, and there's only one kind of principle, then you know that the person operates in a very biased way. So in a more broader spiritual sense, this is very Neptune and Pisces here. We can enter into a discussion of how the universe is conscious. So this is the metaphysical pitch. I thought I would add really quickly, because Jupiter in Sagittarius is very religious convictions. Neptune in Pisces is very mystical and transcendent and lovely that way. But between the two, what we're after is coming to agree that there are maybe some fundamental principles that all religions share. And maybe these are 7 words. But it's not entirely true. But as far as a higher spiritual theme of life goes, we can say the universe is conscious, intelligent, intentional, purposeful, creative, cooperative, and loving, and we see evidences of these words. So it's just a pitch on the what would be understood as the spiritual / metaphysical perspective, that the universe is conscious. We don't just have consciousness, we live in consciousness. That, of course, is its own major debate in the world, by the way. What we have is the major debate between the notion that consciousness comes from the brain versus that the brain comes from consciousness. The way astrology works, and metaphysics for that matter in general, it shows that the brain and all of life and existence and all things in creation come from consciousness. We live in consciousness. We don't just have consciousness. I'll state that as my conviction and belief, and it just by my own observations and studies of astrology, it rather strongly proves that, in fact. So, but as it is, one of the major themes that has been unfolding over the years, this goes a bit certainly further back, but it's had a new level, is the rising feminine. It's all part of the age of Aquarius, and the Uranus-Neptune conjunction, by the way, that happened back in 1965 was very much anchoring this entire theme of the gender revolution. So we see that, but it's now come into a new spiritual place. So increasingly, men and women, positively speaking, are learning bit by bit, day by day, to understand, to listen to each other, to respect each other, to come to a new level of mutual appreciation, where traditionally, of course, most people will recognize that it was very patriarchal, very male-dominant, for all kinds of reasons. So when you step back from it and you begin to look at what's going on in the world, you might realize, yes, we live in this time of change where men and women are coming to a whole new level of appreciation and interaction and mutuality, and the dynamic, though, includes the need to flush out the negatives that have been traditionally anchored. So this also, many of you will be aware, there's this Me Too movement, which is important. It's a part of this awakening, part of this Aquarian revolution, part of the triple conjunction of Chiron, Neptune, and Jupiter in Aquarius was to, the Chiron factor specifically was the healing. And the healing of the patriarchal mindset at worst is very unempathetic. It's very dominant. It's very callous. And so, the subjugation of women and the taking women for granted and the whole imbalance in the relationship factor between men and women is the major issue that we're ironing out. So I truly believe that this is a major theme within the context of our Jupiter Neptune conjunction. So I think that what we're going to see over the course of 2019 is that much more that much more focus and that much more emphasis on events and key pivotal moments that will illustrate that the old patriarchal guard is breaking down, but it could also manifest as it rising up even more fiercely. That's the flip side of it, because as it loses its ground, like if you're losing in a battle, you can sometimes fight harder, in a hope, a final desperate, push. So it's by no means am I saying we're going to see the end of the religious fundamentalist fanaticism that we unfortunately have to endure on the planet. But we will probably see some very poignant moments and key events that will push ahead and, activate a new level of collective understanding that is simply the old reaction of traditional thinking against the flow of evolution, especially specifically of social evolution on our planet. And of course, we live in a world where it's everywhere, practically in every place, there's multiculturalism. It's not, multinationalism exists everywhere. It's not just that there's multinational companies. It's that, almost everywhere in the world, there's people from many nations, and due to modern transportation and immigration laws becoming more flexible, etc., in various, through the UN, etc. What we're seeing, and we've been experiencing this for a long time here in North America and certainly in Europe, and not everybody likes it, but the fact of the matter is that we're becoming more multinational within regions, within countries. Countries are becoming multinational. And it's all a part of it, because within the multinationalism comes cultural differences and traditional differences, and those invariably include religious differences. But even in many countries, there's multiple religions. That's usually the truth of the matter. Any country that refuses to accept other religions does so from a very totalitarian perspective. It does it from a very narrow, very arrogant, I think is the right word, very stuck point of view. And it's fearful and what can also be described as controlling. So this is where the Jupiter-Neptune square is coming to the fore to help iron that out. And of course, we're experiencing increasingly with technology the emergence of a global village. Not everybody likes it, but it's just the way it is. What can you say? Technology has done it. It's nobody's fault that there's technology. Everybody enjoys technology, but what technology is doing, especially with the internet, etc., is it's making borders seem silly. They're there and they're not gone yet, but they probably will be eventually, as this revolutionary impulse kicks in and other cycles of social evolution unfold. We'll probably see increasingly less and less division between nations, and the border principle that like with the building of a wall, etc., it just is outdated. It may be fine in a short-term measure, but if we look closely, what does it really serve? It goes counter. That's an opinion, of course, but the main point is that we are living on a planet that that is very rapidly merging into a whole new dynamic of how people will interact, and it's already been happening for a long time, of course, but the entirely new dynamic, and that's where the Jupiter-Neptune come to the fore, where we have to forge a whole new level of appreciation, both of our respectful tolerance and acceptance of other beliefs and convictions on one hand, but on a higher level yet, coming to see the essence and the common thread between the various religions and cultures, and ideally transcend new levels of appreciation. That it's just like whether it's taste in food or music or sports, if you like, or entertainments, whatever focus you have, we all have different tastes. We have different needs, and sometimes these change over time. So going with the flow of things, we can come to accept that, it's good and healthy that people have room and space to explore new, considerations, new methods, new ways, new beliefs, new perceptions. And that's the challenge of the age. That's significant, and that very much is what Jupiter and Neptune square is all about this year, in particular in 2019. So there we go. Some nice little insights on what Jupiter square Neptune both in their ruling signs is about over the course of the year. So I hope you enjoyed that, and if you have any questions, just please send me those by email or just leave a comment there, and happily share insights about that with everybody if you can come up with new bits to offer that I can explore and expand upon. All right, so thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.